Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with a handful of comrades, staring down an enemy force 10, 20, even 100 times your size. You know the odds. You know the history. But you also know that sometimes courage, cunning, and sheer willpower can turn the impossible into victory. Today, we're counting down the top 10 battles fought against impossible odds. Moments in history when the few stood against the many, and the world was changed by their defiance. 10. The Battle of Thermopylae, 480 BC. Let's start with the legend. 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, and a few thousand Greek allies, held the narrow pass at Thermopylae against Xerxes' Persian army, possibly 1 million strong. For 3 days, they held the line, buying precious time for Greece. They all died, but their sacrifice inspired a nation and became the ultimate symbol of fighting against impossible odds. But what most people forget is that the Spartans weren't alone. Thespians, Thebans, and other Greeks stood with them, and when the final stand came, they fought not just for themselves, but for the idea that freedom was worth dying for. The Persians eventually broke through, but the delay allowed the Greeks to rally and ultimately defeat the invaders at Salamis and Plataea. Thermopylae's legacy is proof that even in defeat, courage can change the course of history. 9. The Siege of Malta, 1565. Fast forward to the Mediterranean. 1565. The Knights of St. John, just 700 strong, and 8,000 soldiers defended Malta against an Ottoman invasion force of over 40,000. For 4 months, the defenders held out against overwhelming numbers, disease, and starvation. When relief finally arrived, only a few hundred knights remained. But the Ottomans had been stopped, and the Mediterranean balance of power shifted forever. The defenders' secret? Relentless discipline, ingenious fortifications, and a refusal to surrender. The Ottomans expected an easy victory. Instead, they found a wall of steel and faith. The siege became a turning point in the struggle between Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire, and Malta's survival inspired resistance across the continent. 8. The Battle of Rorke's Drift, 1879. At a tiny mission station in South Africa, 139 British soldiers faced 4,000 Zulu warriors. For 12 hours, the defenders held off wave after wave of attacks, using every bullet and bayonet they had. When the smoke cleared, the British had lost 17 men, but the Zulus had been repulsed, and 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded for the defense. What's often forgotten is the fear. Private Henry Hook, later awarded the VC, wrote, "I thought we were done for. But as long as one man stood, we all stood." Sometimes, the will to survive is the greatest weapon of all. Rorke's Drift became a symbol of British tenacity, but also a reminder of the cost of empire and the courage of both sides. 7. The Battle of Saragarhi, 1897. 21 Sikh soldiers of the British Indian Army defended an isolated outpost against 10,000 Afghan attackers. Refusing to surrender, they fought to the last man, inflicting hundreds of casualties. Their stand is still celebrated as one of the greatest last stands in military history. Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, the last defender, kept firing the signaling heliograph until he was killed. His final message: "We are under attack by 10,000. We'll fight to the last man and last round." The defenders' sacrifice delayed the enemy long enough for nearby forts to prepare, and their bravery is still honored in India and among Sikhs worldwide. 6. The Battle of Wizna, 1939. Known as the Polish Thermopylae, 720 Polish soldiers held off 42,000 Germans for 3 days at the start of World War II. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered, they delayed the German advance, buying time for the rest of Poland to mobilize. Only a handful survived, but their courage became legend. Captain Władysław Raginis, the Polish commander, swore not to leave his post alive. When the last bunker fell, he kept his word. Wizna's defenders became a symbol of Polish resistance, showing that even in defeat, honor and courage endure. 5. The Battle of Longewala, 1971. At a remote outpost in the Thar Desert, 120 Indian soldiers and a handful of armored vehicles faced a Pakistani force of 2,000 troops and 45 tanks. Through the night, they held their ground, calling in air support at dawn. By morning, the Pakistani attack was shattered, and Longewala became a symbol of Indian resilience. Major Kuldeep Singh Chandpuri, the commander, later said, "We had nowhere to run, so we stood and fought." The victory at Longewala was a turning point in the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971 and is still celebrated in India as a triumph of courage over numbers. 4. The Battle of the Alamo, 1836. For 13 days, 200 Texan defenders held the Alamo mission against 1,800 Mexican troops. Outnumbered nearly 10 to 1, they fought to the last man. Their sacrifice became a rallying cry for Texas independence and a legend of American history. Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, and William Travis became household names, but so did the anonymous men who stood beside them. The Alamo's fall inspired Sam Houston's army to victory at San Jacinto, and "Remember the Alamo" became a call to arms for generations. 3. The Battle of Stalingrad, Pavlov's House, 1942–43. While the Battle of Stalingrad was massive, one small group of Soviet soldiers led by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov held a single apartment building for 60 days against relentless German attacks. With just 25 men, they repelled tanks, infantry, and artillery, turning Pavlov's house into a fortress that became a symbol of Soviet resistance. Pavlov later joked, "It took the Germans longer to take our house than to take Paris." Their stand inspired the Red Army and became a legend of urban warfare. 2. The Battle of Imphal and Kohima, 1944. In the jungles of northeast India, 15,000 Allied troops held off 85,000 Japanese soldiers in one of the most brutal sieges of World War II. Outnumbered, cut off, and starving, the defenders held the line for months until relief arrived. The victory at Imphal and Kohima marked the turning point in the Burma campaign. A memorial at Kohima reads, "When you go home, tell them of us and say, 'For your tomorrow, we gave our today.'" The battles at Imphal and Kohima broke the back of the Japanese offensive in India and changed the course of the war in Asia. 1. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir, 1950. In the Korean War, 30,000 UN troops, mostly US Marines, were surrounded by 120,000 Chinese soldiers in sub-zero temperatures. Against all odds, the Marines broke out, fighting their way 78 miles to the sea, bringing out their wounded and equipment. Their stand is remembered as one of the greatest feats of endurance and fighting spirit in military history. General Oliver Smith, the Marine commander, famously said, "Retreat, hell." We're not retreating, we're just advancing in a different direction. The Chosin Reservoir campaign became a symbol of Marine Corps grit and the power of never giving up, no matter the odds. What do these battles have in common? They show us that numbers aren't everything. Sometimes the courage of a few can change the fate of nations. Sometimes the impossible just means not yet tried. History is full of moments when the few stood against the many. These are just a handful of the most dramatic. Behind every battle are real people, soldiers who wrote home, families who waited, and survivors who carried the scars for the rest of their lives. Private Henry Hook at Rorke's Drift, Sepoy Gurmukh Singh at Saragarhi, Sergeant Pavlov in Stalingrad, and the Marines at Chosin. They all remind us that history is made by individuals who refuse to give up. Why do we remember these battles? We remember these battles not just for their military significance, but for what they teach us about the human spirit. When the odds are impossible, when surrender seems inevitable, there are always those who choose to stand and fight. The lesson is simple. Never underestimate the power of determination. Whether you're facing a battlefield, a personal crisis, or just a tough day, remember the men and women who stood against impossible odds and changed the world. If you found these stories of courage and defiance as inspiring as I did, make sure to subscribe to the channel and check out the videos on your screen right now.